If you like the podcast, don't forget to check us out on Instagram at What Happens in the Crypt. We're also on Spotify, YouTube, and Apple Podcasts. Hey there, carnies, clowns, lunatics, and psychos.
This is episode 6 of What Happens in the Crypt.
Today we're talking about Rob Zombie's debut film, House of a Thousand Corpses. Trigger warnings for this episode include gore, nudity, discussion of sexual assault, or rape and extreme violence.
This movie follows 4 teens on a cross-country road trip to find America's weirdest destinations. They fall directly into traps laid by the Firefly family, and terror ensues. Starting
off, we want to discuss the 4 unfortunate teens that end up in the Firefly hellhole. Bill is played by Rainn Wilson, who we all know and love as Dwight from The Office. He is much younger and hipper in this movie, and he's very handsome.
And just as dorky, though.
Just as dorky.
Next we have Jerry, who's played by one of the Nerd Kings, Chris Hardwick. But he's kind of chubbier in this one.
Yeah.
Got long hair.
I didn't recognize him until you mentioned it, which was like our 4th time watching it.
Yeah, I actually didn't notice until the last time we watched it that it was him.
Along with Bill and Jerry, we also have Erin Daniels, who plays Denise, and Jennifer Jocelyn, who plays Mary. Their whole plan was to make a book about the oddities that you find while you're on a cross-country road trip, and definitely as someone that has actually traveled a lot across the country, there's a lot of weird shit out there, and a coffee table book about it would be pretty great.
This book is ultimately what leads them to Captain Spaulding's place.
Captain Spaulding is played by Sid Haig, R.I.P.
R.I.P.
He died a couple of years ago. He was really famous in our area, too, because he always has done the Comic-Con circuits, and he was really fun and actually made sure to take pictures with everybody and just seems like a genuinely really sweet guy. I saw an interview with him where he mentioned that prepping for being Captain Spaulding, he had to, lose his mind a little bit. Like, he had a hard time getting into that character.
He's my favorite character in this movie.
We also recently got a Venus flytrap that we named Captain Spaulding.
The next unfortunate mistake our characters make is they pick up a hitchhiker who turns out to be Baby. This is Sherry Moon Zombie's actorial, is that a word? Mm-hmm. Actorial debut.
And you can tell. She's definitely not a super seasoned, strong actress, but she's super duper hot.
And I feel like, that's definitely not her normal speaking voice.
Maybe it is.
But you can tell that, she doesn't have a wide range of acting, especially in this movie. But, she does what she needs to do. And, she does give off the crazy psycho vibes. There's no point where I was like, she's so bad that this is ruining the movie.
Right, and that's kind of one of the things that contributes to the campiness, is it's like, yes, she's crazy and wild, but that's kind of all she is. She's absolutely a character. She doesn't seem realistic at all.
But she's great in this.
And the laugh is great.
Yeah, the laugh.
Otis, who's played by Bill Moseley, is basically the head of the Firefly family.
He's kind of a Charles Manson, Ed Gein crossover. He's one of the more seasoned horror actors in the lineup, being in films such as The Blob, Army of Darkness, and Repo, the Genetic Opera.
Yeah, he definitely gives a really scary performance, and one of the things that adds to him being scary, I think, is we don't see him kill too many people. We know that he has the cheerleaders, and there's that scene where he's talking to them, and it's very creepy, but we don't actually see too much of what he does to them, so that mystery aspect of his character adds a lot.
He's not even really in the beginning of the film. He's this figure that gets cut to a couple times, but then he just shows up at dinner once the family's already been introduced, and he just shows up with that jar.
The fetus.
Yeah.
The fetus in a jar. Happy Halloween.
From him showing up, though, he is really the head of the family, and he actually, I think, has the coolest look at the end when he's in the long robes and he's got the the skull face paint with the upside down cross.
Yeah, his makeup is definitely the most iconic from this movie, I think.
I'd say he's tied with Captain Spaulding.
I guess, but you can't really pull off Captain Spaulding makeup unless you're also bald and have the correct facial hair, which you do now.
I was gonna say, are you calling me out?
You could easily pull off Captain Spaulding now, but it's not recognizable, I don't think, really, without the other aspects of it. But
Halloween ideas.
you be Captain Spaulding, I'll be Otis.
Okay, let's do it. And we'll walk around with our Venus flytrap.
Yeah. Then there'd be two Captain Spauldings.
And then there's two Captain Spauldings.
Mama Firefly is played by Karen Black, and she's basically like the cougar of the family, and she tries to seduce Jerry when the kids get there, and she's always in lingerie, and she tries to seduce a cop later on, and she is absolutely crazy. Like, you can tell where Baby gets it from.
Yeah, and she's kind of like a cougar of horror in a lot of ways, because she's been... Karen Black, they specifically wanted her, Rob Zombie wanted her to play this part, because she's been in horror movies for so long. She's been doing them since the 70s.
I hope someday you can refer to me as a cougar of horror. Tiny is played by Matthew McGorry, also R.I.P. He sadly died when he was in his mid-30s just because of complications of gigantism. He's 7'4", and he's super well known for his role in Tim Burton's Big Fish. And he plays a different kind of giant in this movie where he's pretty scary and not friendly and helpful.
Yeah, but you can tell he's misguided, and he's pretty much just doing what the family and Otis tells him to do. But the mask he wears isn't helping his case.
Yeah.
It is kind of terrifying.
And that scene when he's eating cereal just really, like, makes me squirmy for some reason.
It's just the way he's eating it. Oh, just as much as falling out of his mouth.
Yeah, as
going
he's
in.
actually getting.
We forgot to mention in the beginning, but also R.I.P. to horror queen Karen Black.
Grandpa Hugo is played by Dennis Fimple, R.I.P.
He was kind of in a similar situation and role as Karen Black, where he had also been acting for a long time, and he's been doing horror movies since the 70s.
Yeah, and this actually was his last movie as well.
Honestly, pretty cool role to end on, though.
Right.
He was insane, and his character, especially when he's doing the stand-up comedy thing.
Right, when he's hosting the show.
Oh, so creepy. He's so weird.
Yeah, the casting in this movie was definitely spot on for all of the characters. They all play crazy really well, and it's really believable. One of my favorite scenes in this movie is that ridiculous murder ride in the beginning. I definitely, if I ever came across a spooky gas station that claimed to have a murder roller coaster ride, I would risk my life to go on it.
You are about to enter a world of darkness. A world where life and death are meaningless, and pain is God. Woo! Hey, fella, let's go. Yeah.
Yeah, that ride is pretty crazy. It's like a wax museum of murder, and they get pushed along. It's not so much a roller coaster.
Right, it's a lame excuse for a roller coaster. It is someone walking at a regular pace and pushing a cart.
Mm-hmm, but the attractions, these little wax sets, are pretty cool, and most, until the end, are true.
Right. So they end up seeing a little, like, Ed Gein scene, an Albert Fish one, Lizzie Borden, and then it ends with Dr. Satan. Of course, there's that really weird Halloween dinner scene where they wear the masks, but I absolutely love the whole scene where Baby does her little dance.
That scene starts with the grandpa doing some very bad stand-up.
Very pervy stand-up.
Very pervy stand-up.
He just keeps saying, and kick her in the pussy over and over again or something.
And his very loud, over-the-top laugh.
Yeah, he actually truly creeps me out in this scene. And the scene has such a good chance to be scary, I feel like, until Baby starts talking. After she does her little song and dance, Bill's girlfriend gets upset when Baby's flirting with him. And she's like, knocks her over and she's like, you whore, whatever. But Baby says, I'm going to cut your tits off and shove them down your throat.
After pulling a knife on her.
Yes. And it just, for some reason, no matter what, any feelings of that could be a scary scene gets ruined for me with that line.
Come on. Oh, really? Are you going to do something about it?
Do something, motherfucker.
Yeah? Come on. I'll fucking cut your tits off and shove them down your throat.
I think it's just a combo of everything that's been happening, plus her very high-pitched voice.
Right. It's just not scary. It's just so funny to me. That line makes me laugh out loud every time.
If you hear dogs, I'm so sorry. But there's a lot of fireworks happening right now. And one of the most iconic scenes of the movie happens.
It's something you can never unsee, which is Rainn Wilson as the fish boy.
Yeah, the makeup or little, I don't even know, is it actually him and done up in a prosthetic, I think?
I believe so.
And it shows that short little torture scene of him. They like, Baby's Baby and Otis are like cutting him with a razor blade and...
Right, and that's one of those scenes, too, that Rob Zombie talks about was meant to be way longer and scarier, and I think because it was cut, it also falls into that trap of, like, it's just a little too silly to be scary.
Yeah, because it's just not long enough to build up the terror. It's just like, Baby, like, Otis cuts him, and then Baby cuts him, I think, and then they lick the knife, and then it's like, oh, you want to see him?
Right.
Fish boy. Otis is like, I was getting bored, but this sparked my, like, creativity.
Yeah. And, like, a fish boy is not scary. They made Rainn Wilson into a merman. It can't be scary. It is just comical. But it is a really gory and wonderful makeup.
I feel like it's also not scary just because it's us. You know, we see a lot of horror movies. I think your average person might think it's scary, but Rob Zombie did not make this for your average person.
Yeah, and I guess, too, because I am obsessed with The Office, anything I see Rainn Wilson in, he is Dwight to me and no one else. So I just imagined Dwight doing this as a funny Office prank, and it was just revealed.
New Office episode, Jim takes a prank too far.
Oh, God. It's just a close-up of Jim in the conference room covered in blood, like... I guess I took it
he's
too
just
far.
covered in blood, and then he sees the camera, just like, he does his little face, he's just like...
Looks at the camera.
Throughout the movie, Denise's dad is trying to keep tabs on them and check in on them, and eventually he finds his way to the Firefly home.
He shows up with these two total doofus loser cops that, like you can tell from the beginning, are immediately going to get killed.
When they get to the home, her dad and the one police officer head around back where there's this locked shed where they hear somebody pounding on the other side, and they break open the lock, and it's like this really cheesy early 2000s slow-mo.
Right.
And it opens up, and it's actually pretty, like, disturbing because it opens up to, like, some of the dead cheerleaders, and some people are still alive, and there's one girl hanging from a chain.
Right, it's pretty metal, it's pretty gory, but the slow-mo. And then the song.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. It has, like, this happy music, this happy, like, way too upbeat. But I think that was definitely done intentionally.
Right.
And it just makes you feel so much more uncomfortable.
Yeah, it's definitely, like, conflicting imagery to the music, for sure.
I almost took it as, like, this is the music that's going through Otis's head, because then he's right there, and the dad's running away, and he just blows the dad away, who falls into the only puddle for miles.
Right, and it's very dramatic, and once again, funny.
Yeah, and then the cop is just, like, kneeling, like, he gives up immediately.
Right, and then Otis takes him out, like, execution style.
Yeah, that is execution style. And later you see that he has cut her dad's skin off and is now wearing it, including the torso skin, because you can see the bullet holes.
Yeah, it's really gross.
He tries to kiss her through the face.
As her father, he's like, call me daddy. It's gross.
Who's your daddy? Because
Yeah,
that's the one
who's
scene.
your dad?
Who's your daddy? Who's your daddy?
And I'm the one who loves you when you're fucking dead.
That's one of the scenes, though, that really make this movie, though. That's one of the scenes, like, I can never forget that.
Right. And the makeup in that scene is so well done. It's very obvious that he has a face on top of his face, but you understand why from a distance she does think that that is her dad, too. When Otis ends up wearing Denise's father's face, it's definitely a callback to famous murderer Ed Gein, who actually used to do things with his victims' skin and wear them. And he was also the inspiration for Buffalo Bill from Silence of the Lambs.
Yeah, literally turning people's skin into clothing. One of the most famous things he did, he's known for his nipple belt.
Right, I forgot about that. That's also very gross.
Yeah, once you know of that, you cannot you can't forget a nipple belt.
Otis ends up dressing the kids up as rabbits, and there's this cut scene where he keeps saying, "Run, rabbit, run." Over and over again. It zooms in on his gross mouth, and it is super unsettling. And that's definitely one of the scenes I remember the most whenever I think of this movie, is that "run, rabbit, run" over and over again.
Yeah, I believe the whole, like, I know Baby shouts it too. I think a lot of the family starts to shout it with him.
Baby also ends up chasing Mary through the cemetery, chanting this weird little, like, floofy rabbit rhyme, and then she stabs Mary to death while she's chanting it too, and it's definitely unsettling.
Along came a rabbit and ate up all the cabbages. The woman said, go into the garden and drive out the rabbit.
Yeah, because there's even, like, blood flying up in her face while she's stabbing her, because she stabs her, like, 3 or 4 times.
And of course she licks the knife, because classic.
It's a horror movie. You have to lick the blood off a knife. The ending of this movie introduces a whole new level of chaos.
Not just the story, but there's plenty of new characters that we meet right at the end, too.
Rob Zombie got the idea from this movie from a horror maze that he was working on, and it feels like he really tried to work that in, for some reason, into the movie.
Yeah, the ending is really, like, has too many things going on. There's so many good ideas, but it's really chaotic, and it does end up turning into a haunted house feeling scenario where Denise ends up, like, going through one door and it's zombies, then the next door is a spooky surgeon in the next door.
Yeah, and it's really a shame because it's all really, really cool, and it, like, the makeup and the practical effects are amazing, but it's as soon as Chris Hardwick's character and Denise get lowered into this, like, they get put into a coffin and they're being lowered into the water as, like, a form of torture. They're gonna die. But then, like, these zombies break their coffin up, and it's the first supernatural element that's in the movie.
Right, they, like, emerge from the water, but it's like, when did we find out that there were zombies in this?
After the zombies, she runs through a literal maze and then winds up in this underground
Lair?
Asylum?
Yeah, there's a bunch of new characters that are totally messed up looking that we have not seen before.
Yeah, there's brief mention that Dr. Satan used to work in this insane asylum and that he would experiment and cut open his patients and kill people. And then he just disappears. And then there's no, like, real mention of him. You know, the kids ask the family questions because apparently he hung himself or got killed on their property. But then he's literally just there with his own asylum at the end.
Right, it definitely feels like it should have been a separate movie, or it didn't belong within this Firefly family dynamic, really. It's definitely weird.
Yeah, and it's because this is where I'm so conflicted about the movie, because, like, it's really cool, and he looks awesome, and he has these, like, he's got the guy that's in this gas mask with this kind of, like, little, like, mechy suit thing.
Yeah.
Who starts chasing Denise, and he has this, like, choked breathing, and, like, that could have been such a cool horror movie on itself, and all the characters are cool, and it's scary, but it just doesn't make sense in this film, and nothing gets explained, and it's only in the last 10 minutes.
Right, like, what does this have to do with the psycho family that's upstairs?
Yeah, and how, like, this has just been operating for many, many, many decades. It's just very confusing.
Yeah, I would have loved way more information and more screen time of the actual Dr. Satan, for sure.
Yeah, maybe that's in the 40 minutes that Rob Zombie said got cut from this movie.
That will never be released.
He keeps saying it's gonna happen, so come on, Rob Zombie. Please. I would watch it. I would buy it. I'd buy that Blu-ray. Give me that box set.
It'd be upsetting, but I would watch it.
Oh, yeah.
The ending feels like it would have been so much more satisfying if it had just gone off on that note of Otis doing his sacrifice and whatever witchy stuff they were cooking up there.
His outfit and makeup and everything is so cool. It would have just been like a cool, satisfying, pretty dark, twisted end. But instead it ends on just like a, huh?
Yeah,
just, like,
it ends on a
confused.
question mark.
I do love like the Captain Spaulding thing, like, I'm not gonna let her get away, but like it's just everything that happens between those two things where I was just like, what is going on?
Right, and even after how weird that ending is, you find out after looking anything up about this movie that Rob Zombie ran out of money and did a really shitty ending on purpose so that Universal would give him more money to redo it. And even this redone version is not great.
I feel like he got the money and he still had all these ideas that he wanted to do, so he just did all of them with the money he got.
That makes sense.
Again, one of the things I love about this movie, we've touched on it a bit, is that it's all practical. There's these cool suits and all these intense makeups that got done for Dr. Satan and his creations. There's just the skin that he's wearing. It's all practical, and that's what I love.
The makeup on this movie was done by Wayne Toth, who we talked about previously, as he also did all of the makeup on the first 3 Subspecies movies.
A true master of his craft.
Yeah, he's a really cool horror makeup dude, and it's definitely fun to see whatever he's worked on. It's always really high quality. One of the things that really stuck out to me for some reason in this movie is the t-shirts.
Yeah, I didn't actually notice it until you brought it up.
Yeah, this is such a weird, campy detail that adds to, like, the backwoods, like, hillbilly dynamic of this, but if you pay attention, you'll notice that Otis and Captain Spaulding and even Tiny end up wearing these really silly graphic t-shirts. Like, Captain Spaulding is wearing a shirt in the very beginning that says, "If I wanted to listen to an asshole, I'd fart." And there's also Tiny wearing a "This is my Halloween costume" shirt. It just adds to that humor element for me a lot.
One of the things I really appreciate about this movie was its experimental approach, almost music video-like approach. Throughout the movie, it cuts kind of randomly to different scenes that kind of don't have to do with the movie, but at the same time loosely do. It also happens when some of the characters get knocked unconscious. For example, there's a scene where everybody gets knocked out, and it cuts to this person just running through the desert. And this movie actually, like, the beginning through the title sequence cuts away and has its own, I'm sure, Rob Zombie music.
Of course.
Yeah, it's definitely Rob Zombie music. But it actually kind of feels like a music video. It kind of, there's times in this movie where it cuts away and just has its own little random disturbing imagery.
Right, and a lot of those home video-esque scenes were actually filmed in Rob Zombie's basement. When they started to run into money trouble on the movie, he just wanted to keep going and try to get the scenes he wanted, so they actually filmed a lot of that at his house.
I actually really like that they did that, because it's supposed to feel like the Charles Manson family videos that they were known to do. I know Rob Zombie wasn't happy when one of his ideas got cut a little short with his wife.
So, of course, there's that small segment of home video where Baby is, like, making out with a skeleton.
Yeah, and she's naked.
She's naked. She's rubbing a skeleton hand on her nipples. That scene, I guess, was intended to be much longer, and it was supposed to be her actually masturbating with the skeleton. Hence that NC-17 rating of that full-length version.
Yeah, I believe it was supposed to be with the arm.
Yeah, it would have been far too much.
Yeah, that's one of the parts where I'm like, no, that's fine on the length there.
Right.
I know some of you will get mad at me for saying that, but come on.
Right, we don't need to see it. We know what she's doing anyways. She's a gross freak. Surprisingly enough, too, Rob Zombie actually claimed that the film was not meant to feature elements of black humor. This quote I found from him says, "It turned out a little wackier and campier than I originally intended, but as we were shooting, that's the tone that it was turning out to be. Movies sometimes dictate their own course, so I just sort of went with it." This just baffles me because I feel like you could not write any of that dialogue and intend it to just be straight up horror.
Yeah, there's always an element of the movie that you can't control, and it kind of just turns into its own thing. But, like, unless he had a different script, then you would know that this is going to be campy. This is going to be kind of funny.
Right, you can't have a grown woman that is meant to be scary call someone poopy pants and have it not be funny.
And say, I'm going to cut your tits off and jam them down your throat.
Right.
As mentioned briefly earlier, Rob Zombie got the idea for this movie while he was working on a maze of the same name. It's a haunted maze that runs at Universal Studios in California and Florida.
Right.
This is additionally funny because Universal refused to put this movie out.
This movie ended up bouncing between Universal to MGM until it was actually released by Lionsgate.
We mentioned earlier that the budget for the end was extended, and actually Rob Zombie himself had to put a lot of his own money into it because of these different companies bouncing it back and forth, saying they didn't want to release it. So the original budget, if you look it up, the budget was estimated to be about $7 million, but it's actually estimated to be somewhere in the ballpark of like 12 to 14.
Right. There was an interview with Rob Zombie where he said when they wanted him to reshoot the crappy ending, they gave him an obscene amount of money to do it, and we don't actually really know the number.
You can watch Rob Zombie talk about this movie a lot. Even like modern recent interviews. He actually did a interview on the Joe Rogan podcast that was much more recent. And you can tell he is still bitter about this.
For sure. The scene in the caves towards the end when the guy in the goggles is chasing Denise, he actually was holding a real axe and he could not see out of this mask. And it's actually in the movie, but there was a swing that he took at her and she didn't move fast enough and he actually almost hits her.
Yeah, they kept mentioning that interviews with Rob Zombie and interviews with the cast and crew, they all literally say, we just assumed she was just going to be fast enough. Like, there's a guy in full makeup. Like, she's going to be faster than him, and it's going to be fine.
Right. That's so not nice.
That's so not how it works. Like, I mean, it all was fine in the end, but, like, that's not safety.
For our Firefly fatalities, there are 11 deaths in this movie.
Richard Wick, who had that wonderful rhyme about him, was our first fatality of this movie, who was shot in the head by Captain Spaulding.
His partner, Killer Carl, is also hammered and shot by Captain Spaulding.
Bill Hudley, a.k.a. Dwight, was dismembered by Otis after he cut him repeatedly and then turned him into the fish boy.
All of the cheerleaders, who are unnamed, are obviously murdered off-screen by the various members of the Firefly family.
Mostly Otis, but yeah. Lieutenant George Wydell was shot, kind of in the neck by Mama.
Yeah.
Yeah, poor guy.
Don Willis, Denise's daddy, is shot by Otis.
And then falls into that puddle. Deputy Steve Nash, who, begging for his life, gets shot point blank in the head by Otis.
Mary Knowles, who was one of the rabbits at the end there, is stabbed repeatedly by Baby.
Poor Jerry Goldsmith, he goes through so much. He gets scalped by Baby, and then he gets lowered into that coffin in the water, survives all of that just to have his brain stabbed apart by Dr. Satan.
Finally, Denise Willis, who gets picked up by Captain Spaulding after she almost escapes, and we just have to assume she's either murdered by Otis or Dr. Satan, as we see her in that spooky lair at the end.
Either way, not great.
We give this movie a 7 out of 10. It's definitely a classic as far as gory horror, but it does have definite weak plot points throughout.
It's just like, it's the end. They just try to cram so many ideas into one movie.
Right, but it's just so quotable and it's so fun. You just can't hate it.
Definitely recommend this movie for any horror gore fan.
For sure. This is available to watch on Tubi, and so are the sequels that follow as well.
And don't worry, we're going to be covering the sequels. Just not now. We don't want to do 3 episodes in a row about Rob Zombie movies. Not that we couldn't, it's just a good change of pace. And you guys got to keep coming back.
Right. Next week, we're talking about the 1985 movie Nightmare on Elm Street 2, and we actually wanted to talk about the second one because of the recent documentary that came out on Shudder, Scream Queen, My Nightmare on Elm Street, which is all about Mark Patton.
We're not going to skip the first movie, of course. We are going to go back to it, but we think that this would be fun to do because this is a very new 2020 documentary to go in tandem with the second movie.